All right, welcome back to Making the Argument. And once again, we have a very interesting interview for you today. So anybody that's been watching this show for a while knows that we discuss the whole concept of, what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a good husband? What does it mean to be a good father? And today we're going to be talking about something that, quite frankly, is going to be uncomfortable. But it's a discussion that needs to be had. And I want to hit this topic from a little bit different direction because there's a ton of people out there talking to young men, talking to young women about what they should be doing, what they should be, or don't do. Don't do this, don't do that, don't behave this way, don't behave. But today we have a guest that, again, grew up in a broken home, had dreams, had ambitions, and sought out to honestly follow them and completely got derailed on a different track. That took him down a different path that he found out a way to escape later. And what I think is so interesting about his story is, again, understanding that he can give you insight into not only a lifestyle, but an industry that I think, quite frankly, has lied to a lot of us. In fact, I know it has. And so I'm really honored that Joshua Broome would join us today. So Josh, how you doing, man?
So good, Nick. So glad to be here. I'm glad that we made this happen. Had a lot of great conversations, speaking at events together, and I'm glad that you've invited me on your platform.
All right, everyone, I hope you're enjoying this episode. As you can see, I am not in the studio right now, and that is because Nick Hamilton and I are over in Israel, touring Israel right now, and we're going to come back with some really good information about that. But I needed to do a quick plug for our friend over at Jeremy's Razors. That's right. As you can see, the glorious beard is now coming back. I think we're on day 12 right now. That's those Portuguese genes kicking in. But what that means is I get to use Jeremy's beard oil, not to mention the other products such as the brush and the comb, because again, you got to keep this tidy. You got to keep this tidy, right? And Tina also makes sure that I have to, keep this part shaved, and I use Jeremy's razors for that as well. Again, absolutely superior product. We don't just do business with people because they agree with us ideologically. We do business with people that also make a superior product, and Jeremy's Razors does just that. Plus, if you go on right now, jeremy'srazors.com, you use promo code Nick, you're going to get 15% off. And again, it's not all about the razors, right? The razors are reason enough, but it's the beard oil, it's the beard grooming components that you can get. Plus, it's things like deodorant, it's things like soaps, it's all the things that, quite frankly, I don't want to go to the store for. I just want it to randomly show up at my house, and Jeremy's Razors makes it possible. So, jeremy'srazors.com, promo code Nick, get that 15% off, and don't give your money to companies that hate you. Give it to Jeremy, and then he gives me some. So that's helpful. Thanks again. I hope you guys enjoy the episode.
Well, I first met Josh, to give everyone some little context here. I first met Josh at a meeting that we were both invited to, where we were actually talking about various ways to combat human trafficking. As well as abuse, child abuse specifically, but other forms of abuse as well. And all of us kind of sitting around at this table had different backgrounds, and some people had been victims of abuse. Some people had engaged in recovering children, both domestically and internationally. Some of us were legislators. Some of us were soldiers. Some of us were intel analysts. Some people were kind of working on the ethical hacker front. And I'm looking over at this Josh Broome guy, and I'm like, all right, he's kind of a big dude, right? This guy work. All right. And I'm waiting for the story about, the military or law enforcement or something like that. And then Josh introduces himself as, spent quite a few years in the porn industry. I was like, oh, whoa.
Didn't see that coming.
I didn't see it coming. And even though, and I look back later, I was like, it was okay. It was there in our little pamphlet and whatnot, but I hadn't got to it as the various descriptions. And when you started talking, I was like, whoa, okay. I'm really interested to hear this story. So if you would tell us a little bit about, kind of like your starting point growing up and how you found yourself in this industry. And then again, by the grace of God, eventually left it. But share us a little bit of that backstory first.
Yeah, I love that you are passionate about equipping fathers. Father myself, so I'm a father of 4 boys, and just looking at this world, it's like, hey, how can we equip these children to become men that not only know what they need to be wary of, but how do they advance in this world with their eyes open, knowing that the real danger that's out there, and how do they combat it? But a large part of my story is that aspect of fatherlessness. So I grew up in a small town in South Carolina, and normative, unfortunately, in Western culture, where a lot of people grow up without dads in their home. My mom got pregnant with me pretty young, pregnant at 15, had me at 16. And what was unique about my upbringing was that because the town was so small, so contrast, this is South Carolina. You got Charlotte, Matthews, Monroe, and you cross the state line, and you got the self-proclaimed watermelon capital of the world, Pageland, South Carolina. Like one grocery store, one gas station. So small that my dad, who I never had in my life or in my home, he was in that small town. So I would see him as I was getting older. And there were a few advancements on his part, trying to figure out how could he incorporate himself into my life. And, looking back on this, decades later, I have empathy for him in that this young man feeling shame, because as shame, it continues to exist, it compounds over time, and him not knowing what to do, and the enemy whispering in his ear. But what that looked like in my life was a young kid that was really confused because, I graduated with 100 people, and I was the only kid at my football and basketball and baseball games that didn't have a dad in the stands. I was the only person that I knew of that was playing basketball by themselves in their backyard. Throwing, I learned how to throw a football to receivers. I had different bushes who were running different routes. And I was confused about that as I got younger. And what almost made it more complicated was the fact that a few years after I was born, he gets married, has another family, and his family was not only more successful than my mom was. They literally lived beside his mom and dad. So all of a sudden they've got the nice home. They had multiple like Z71s like out in the yard. They lived on a farm, and they lived beside his mom and dad. So all of a sudden, everything that I thought existed only in a Hallmark movie, because I certainly didn't have it in my life, I thought I should have access to, but something in me made me believe, well, maybe I was disqualified from that because I was not good enough. What's wrong with me? And it grew from curiosity to frustration. And then, all men are, have this God-given characteristic to be high achievers. And if it's in, that aspect of your personality, if it's surrendered and submitted to the person of Jesus Christ, it can be a great thing. You can, have great work ethic. You can do good work. You can, these things can be positive in your life if they're leading you to do good things. But through the lens of insecurity and brokenness, I believe that if I had enough, that I would feel like I was enough. So I sought out to be, the best student, the best athlete. And I thought, well, if I did those things, it would make me feel some sort of way. And I was trying to mitigate my broken heart. And if I'm honest, the thing that I wanted to hear was, son, I'm proud of you. Mm-hmm. And because I never heard that, I thought, well, if I could get enough yeses from girls and pats on the back and high fives and awards and accolades, I thought maybe, just maybe, that would fill the gap. And, like every momentary high, it worked for a moment, but when that high, it leveled back out, you actually felt more low because you don't have anyone to celebrate that win with.
And that had to be, that had to be an interesting dynamic, because so my parents got divorced when I was young, but my dad was still involved in my life, but he also lived 500 miles away. So I saw him during the summers and the winters, but as much as it wasn't ideal, there was still this structure, and I kind of understood the nature of the structure. But you're growing up in a situation where, again, your dad's in town. It's not like you don't know where he's at. It's not like it's not like he couldn't see you more regularly. And you're doing all those things that you would think as any boy watching TV, you would think if I do these things, right, if I'm playing football and if I'm doing this and I'm a good athlete, those are things that are going to make my dad proud. I know because all my other buddies' dads are proud. So why isn't that had to be, I mean, that had to be a incredibly difficult dynamic. I mean, it's already difficult, but that just had to add to it.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. And it, what was, because what was in me, it's almost like, hoping for something that is probably not going to happen. And that hope that you have is like, so for me to explain this best, so my mom did get married when I was 7, and from 7 to 11, she was married to this horrific person. He was abusive, drug addict. But the good thing that came out of it was my brother. And the thing that really marked him was the inconsistency and the broken promises, where after they were divorced, he would promise, hey, I'm going to show up. And then he wouldn't show up. And then he would show up, and then not show up. He would get arrested and disappear for months. And I think that for me, in a similar way as I remember him so clearly, with, in the South with the screen door, with the wood door open and the screen door closed, and looking out the screen door, waiting on his dad to come pick him up at 10 o'clock because he said he would. And then 10:30 comes, 11 o'clock comes, 11:30, 12 o'clock, still looking out the door. He's pacing, but still looking, still hoping, but he never shows up. In the same way, every award ceremony, every game, I'm hopeful, but my hope started to dissipate over time. And I thought, well, maybe I'll just chase after this feeling of I'm good enough. And maybe that just has to be good enough in itself because he never showed up.
Yeah. So you're experiencing this growing up, small town, and you're being relatively successful within that sporting environment and whatnot. So you're getting positive feedback, but you're not getting positive feedback from your father. You're not getting any engagement from your dad. And like you said, it's this idea of highs and lows because there's something missing that isn't going to be answered just by kind of these temporary accolades. But how does that translate into what you plan to do? Like, as you're getting closer to like high school ending and whatnot, how does that translate into, again, trying to find something to replace what was needed from your dad?
Yeah. So for me, I started modeling and acting also when I was around 13, 14 years old. And interestingly enough, that was the first time that I saw pornography.
Wow.
And this had a really, it was interesting because all of a sudden I was invited into a more nuanced world. Because growing up in a small town, it's like I wasn't exposed to different environments, different foods, different, travel and things like that. So all of a sudden that became an aspect of my life. And that just, if I'm honest, that became a new dopamine hit of choice. It became a new drug of choice. And then when I saw pornography around that same time, it made me very curious in that I'd never seen love between a husband and a wife demonstrated. So for someone that wanted to be loved, I thought that when I saw this interaction in a magazine between a guy and a girl, I thought, well, maybe that's what love is. That's why, Romans 12:2 is so important. You're either being conformed by the world or you're being transformed by the renewing of your mind. It's either the world is going to educate you, or we're going to cling to Scripture being true, and we're going to allow God's truth to supersede what the world says. And
but but I can just say real quick, so this is an interesting point that I think people that maybe haven't experienced don't quite understand. And when I say experience, I mean experience at that age and within that context. Because if you're growing up in an environment where you for relatively speaking, loving mom, loving dad, somewhat stable environment, you might be exposed to something like that, and even though the exposure itself is bad, you view it through a different lens. But if you're exposed to it, not only at your age, but under the conditions that you were, this isn't just, this is kind of a spicy thing to view. This is actually informing your view of what like, and not just, again, not porn in the way we think of it. This is actually informing the way you think about an appropriate male-female relationship.
Yeah. I mean, literally, I went from, for the way that impacted my life, it wasn't a catalyst for me being addicted to pornography. It was a catalyst for me saying, okay, I've got, opportunities to go on dates with these girls and doing all these things. All of a sudden I thought, well, if I engage with women in that way, maybe I will feel the thing that I'm searching for. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, like to your point, in a real way, I saw that as an educational component in me starting to understand, well, maybe if I don't feel loved or I'm not experiencing what I want or what I need, maybe if I experience this aspect of intimacy, then I will feel closer, close enough to that person, or maybe in some way I will feel loved in a way that I don't. Because I mean, what you said is true. Like my mom, amazing, but the practicality of a single mom providing for a family is she worked a ton, and she worked in the restaurant industry. So she didn't work a 9 to 5. She worked like a 10 to 7 or 8, sometimes 9 o'clock.
Yeah.
So that was tough.
Well, and let's
Because
face it, if you're a successful athlete in a small town and you're picking up modeling gigs at this was, by the way, not my experience. Like, you're picking up modeling gigs at like 13 and 14 years old, that's taking you out of town or taking you out of their environments. That's an incredible. I mean, you have a lack of supervision just by the practical necessity that your mom needs to work, but you're also trying to find opportunities, and she's probably excited that you're getting opportunities. But man, that's a lot of pressure on a kid trying to make sense of the world.
Oh, certainly. And if I'm honest, it was crushing me. And
What do you mean by that?
I think that when you pursue something and you achieve it, and like the when you pursue something that you think is going to give you something, and then you achieve it and it doesn't make you feel like you thought it would,
Gotcha.
it's pretty demoralizing. When you pursue this conquest, you pursue the girl that no one can get, or if the thing that you wish that you had. I mean, to put it in a sense that, outside of my own life, it's like, to the person that is struggling with pornography, and they think like, well, the pornography addiction is going to go away when I get married, because I'm actually going to have sex, and I've been good, right? So I haven't had any kind of sex with a person, but I've had these, this sexual immorality in my life for so long. But I'm in this disbelief of, if I have a wife, then this negative behavior is just gonna all of a sudden magically be eradicated from my life. It's this disillusionment that comes with sin. It's like, well, if I had the right truck, if I had the right title, if I had the right job, if I had more money, if I had more influence, if I had more, or something, whatever that thing is, when it doesn't make you feel like you thought it would when you achieve it, it levels you.
Yeah.
And I experienced that many times.
So
Yet I found myself continuing going back over and over again.
So, and I mean, which is kind of understandable, because if you're looking for something that's going to make you feel validated and like appreciated for what you do, then you go to the areas where you're at least getting some appreciation. So how do you go from, again, kind of doing this and being introduced to this world in South Carolina? How does that take you all the way out to the West Coast?
Yeah. So, for about 2 years, so I went to college in Florence, South Carolina, so Francis Marion University. Went there, studied theater for a while, joined a fraternity, did all the things. And really, I was just trying to have a good time. And if I'm honest, and in the middle of that, I started to have more success as a model, which was, if I'm honest, it was frustrating, because the thing that I want to be the thing that I wanted to be successful doing was acting. Yet that was something that didn't come as easily, and the opportunities didn't come in the frequency in which modeling did. So I just kind of like, okay, I'll ride this ship, but hopefully I'll get to where I want to go, because those worlds are somewhat interconnected. But I had an agent that I had worked with a little bit in the mainstream world, and a talent, a talent agent, and she ultimately said, "Hey, I think that you're doing great. You got a good look, and your resume's decent, but if you were in closer proximity to the industry in which you want to be a part of, then the frequency in which you would be working would increase. So, to make it practical, if you move to either LA, New York, or Miami, then that would be advantageous for your career. And LA seemed like it made sense for me, specifically Hollywood. So I dropped out of college the second semester of my sophomore year and moved to Hollywood. And this agent signed me, and everything happened that she said would. Like, I started working a decent amount, and but at the same time, I'm not comparing my success to the things in which I'm experiencing. I'm looking to my left or right, and the people around me were having more success, or they seemed to be, because they had a level of contentment or joy that I didn't have. And more, or like whatever it was never enough, and I always felt left out or looked over. And that led to me living a lifestyle that was, that there's people who, spend more money than they make. And then there were me, like I was living far beyond my means. I had to be the guy with a table. I had to be getting bottles. I had to be at, whatever place that had just opened up, or in Vegas or LA or whatever. And that led to me needing to, make more money than I was making. So it made sense for a lot of people, like in that field, to work at bars or like hotel bars or restaurants and or clubs in LA. And there it was more like, hey, let me see your headshot and contrast your resume, because really it was a networking opportunity, and people there were seasonal, and they were really there to kind of get by or meet someone or whatever. But I'm in this place, and while I'm there, three girls walk in, and essentially they were headhunters from the porn industry. And they asked me, hey, would you be interested in meeting with our agent? And I know that you're passionate about this, and this is something that I get the opportunity to speak all over, and predominantly in churches. And I think language is so important. And they used language that broke down barriers that, because I was susceptible to manipulation, they used familiar language with me that I said yes to things that I ought not say yes to. And they said, hey, we want you to meet with our agent. He's at this studio, and he will talk to you about maybe going on an audition. And I knew I should have said no, but if I'm honest, I was living in a way that wasn't that different than what you would see in a porn film. So I'm like, okay, well, maybe I'll just meet with the guy. Like, what harm could it do? And if I go to meet this guy and he's in, like, a roach motel in the middle of nowhere, like picking lint out of his belly button, I'm just gonna like hightail it out of there. But I get there, and it's this very nice studio adjacent to Universal Studios, right off of a Hollywood Bowl, in this very prominent area in Studio City. And I walk in, and receptionist, and wait here, and you'll meet with this guy. And I sit down. He was very forward. And he asked me three questions. He said, how did you grow up? What are you doing in LA? And what do you hope to accomplish? And in retrospect, he wanted ammunition so that he could have a conversation contextually, so that he could say what I would need to hear for me to do what he wanted me to do.
So let me back up one second here, because I think this is important. You said, so initially you're at a club or something like that in LA, and you get approached by the three women that are headhunters, and they like you kind of identified, they knew exactly what to say to you to get you to consider what they were
Sure.
putting down. Because so right off the bat, they understand that they're asking you to do something that's outside the norm. You
Sure.
understand that you're being asked to do something outside the norm, but they know how to talk to you, and it becomes easy to justify based off of the things that the way you're already living your life at that point doesn't seem all that different, except you're not getting paid and it's not getting filled.
Sure.
And so again, you come up, there's these justifications, and we all do this. Like, we all do this in our lives with a million different things. But I'm just trying to get an idea for how this process goes, because there are so many people that will try to say, oh, this is just normal and sex work is work and no big deal. If that was true, they wouldn't have needed to approach you the way they did. He wouldn't have needed to ask you the questions that he did. And I find it fascinating. I have never been to a job interview, not once, where the first question out of someone's mouth was, how did you grow up?
Yeah.
So did you see that as him just being friendly, or was there any sort of red flag associated with that?
I mean, I should have, but I mean, I think in a way I was kind of captivated by the moment, maybe a little nervous. So I think that because I was not self-aware in that moment, I was so insecure that every time I engaged with someone, I thought that I had something to prove. You know,
How old were you?
if I would say 22.
Oh my gosh.
So if I mean, I would say like from, you know, like 22 to really even like all of my 20s and some of my teens, it's like, you know, I would describe it as, you know, Kurt Lazarus. Like I was a dude playing a dude disguised as another dude that didn't know what dude he was, you know, like,
Yeah.
you know, because I called it a first date mask, you know, so I didn't think I had anything truly valuable to offer. So what I would often do when I would interact with women and even, you know, friends, I would examine them and hear what they had to say. And I would try to become who I thought they wanted me to be so that they would like me, because I thought if they actually knew who I was, I would be that same kid that got rejected by their dad.
Got it.
So, he's asking me, you know, how did you grow up? I grew up just me and my mom. So he's looking for ammunition to manipulate someone. Okay, he comes from a broken home. He's looking for something he doesn't have. Why are you in LA? I'm here to model, act, be in this creative space. So really nothing there. And then so interestingly enough, I think is the most intriguing. The third thing he said, what do I hope to accomplish, you know, from being out here? And I said, I hope to be famous. And it's so interesting because, you know, famous is vague. It's not real. You know, you know, it's kind of the same thing as like being rich, because what quantitates being famous, what quantitates being rich, there's no, even if you attach a metric to it, it's somewhat fictional because there's no, you know, there's no like set, like, okay, if you do that, you achieve this. And I thought, well, you know, if enough people liked me, if enough people knew me, if I did enough, maybe then I would feel like I was enough. And so interesting that you said what you said a minute ago, because you know the shame that's associated with it, and this, you know, this obvious, this is not, you know, normative behavior. um After he says, okay, you know, you're going to be the guy, you know, he says the porn industry is shifting to parodying these big films, and because you have acting experience, that's going to be advantageous for you, so you'll be the lead in these films. You'll make a lot of money. You'll be successful. Everyone will know your name. And it's like, okay, okay, okay. Oh, and then by the way, the first thing you're going to do, no one goes by their real name. The first thing we're going to do is choose a pseudonym in which you're going to go by. That in itself points to, if it's so cool and if it's so amazing, why is the first thing you do choose another name to go by? It's because there's this innate level of shame that's associated with it that, you know, you don't even have to speak about. It's like thinking about, you know, if someone sent you an inappropriate picture when you were at the library and you had your phone and you saw it and someone walked by, you would immediately turn it down. And it's because there's something in you that just knows this is inappropriate. This is off. There's something not right about that. And I just find it so interesting that no one in that industry goes by their name. The first thing they do is they choose a name to cover up their real name because they don't want their true likeness to be associated with that behavior.
You know, the explanation for that now seems to be, well, that's just because of archaic notions of morality or social constructs. And as soon as we get rid of those social constructs, and as soon as we get rid of that traditional morality that's holding us down, well, then we'll be able to experience all of this and guilt-free and shame-free. And really the problem is the shame, not the thing leading to the shame. But let me ask you this. So he's selling it, right? He's identified right off the bat that there's brokenness. He knows that and again, like you said, that third component where you said, what do you want to get out of this? And you said famous, and it's like, well, shoot, he can actually craft what that means for you.
Yeah.
And if he's providing and again, you're 22. So you're 22, he puts out this offer. Do you just kind of accept it right away? Or is this something that you kind of wait and see if other things, develop, or do you just, did he sell you?
Yeah. I think that because I thought, I think there were two contributing factors to the way in which I lived my life. Number one, I didn't have a real foundation or anything in which I built my identity out of. And there were, we have these memorial stones in our lives where we can look to, like, okay, these were moments that shaped us, some for good, some for bad. And for me, my identity was I was my mother's son. That was the thing in which I was most proud of. That was the thing that I clung to. I loved my mom. She was the only person that never let me down. She was the only person that never hurt me. She did any and everything to provide for me, in spite of us living in government housing and having food stamps and things like that. She still would find a way for me to do one thing per year, like I would go to basketball camp at University of South Carolina. And that was like, that was my birthday, Christmas, the one-stop shop gift. And I was just like, in retrospect, I'm like, how did she do it? Well, she did it working 80, 90 hours a week. And I remember so clearly I was 10 years old, and there was a dresser that was pushed against my mom's bedroom door, and I heard a ruckus, and I heard my mom, it sounded like she was being harmed. And I went and I tried to push the door open, and I couldn't. And I remember having my forearm against the door, and I pushed it enough just where I could see through this crack, and I saw this man hitting my mom. And no matter how hard I pushed, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get the door open. I couldn't save her. And I think like that was crippling for me in a way, because I had one job, and it was to protect my mom. And I think that moment scarred me in a way where I found myself justifying doing things I ought not do, because I thought I lost a level of my identity, because if I can't even do that right, what good am I? And I think like that played into it definitely played in a way, like, not like, I don't want to say, that caused me to do that, because I think, upon my own volition, I chose to do those things. But our feelings and trauma and brokenness, they often factor into the way in which we see ourselves, which impacts the things we do and how we rationalize decisions that we make. But leading into that, that was a factor. It's like, man, I'm not good enough to actually make it anyway. So it's like maybe this counterfeit version of this dream that I have that he's offering, I know this is not what I want to do, but maybe I'm just not good enough to make it. Maybe this is as good as it's going to get for me. So I was continuously selling myself short in a way because of how I saw myself. So I thought, well, this is probably not something I should do, but maybe I should at least consider it. And then he said, well, the first thing that you would do is go get a full panel STD test and AIDS test. There's one lab that everyone goes to create a consistent sample across the board. And I was like, well, I've lived a very promiscuous life. Probably wouldn't hurt to go get this test. So I did. I went and got it, and everything came back fine. And so now that was essentially your work permit for that industry. That's all you needed to work. And he called me and he was like, okay, like everything came back clean. I can set up a shoot for you tomorrow if that works for you. And I was like, sure. And then he's like, well, I'm going to send a car to pick you up. I'm going to send a town car to come pick you up, and they're going to take you to the location. And I was asking him, I was like, well, I can just, I can get there myself. Like, just give me the address, and then I'll show up. Just tell me what time to be there. He's like, no. He's like, the way we like to do things is we would, since it's your first time, we would like to send a car to pick you up just to cater to you and, alleviate some of the stress.
Mm-hmm.
And then that car will take you there and pick you up. And then I thought, all that, like, I thought in my mind at that moment, I was like, oh, that sounds cool. This person's like really trying to take care of me. And then I thought, like, what would it hurt? No one's going to know anyway. I'll just do one. How big of a deal could it be? And I go, and, this town car picks me up, takes me to this studio, and I get to set, and there's some receptionist there, like, hey, fill out this paperwork. I didn't read anything. I just signed everything. And man, I would love to come back and just touch on the paperwork that I signed, because it's crazy. But then I walk in, and then there's a couple girls in makeup in this little like lighted area. And then I continue walking, and there's catering and all this stuff. And I was like, man, this feels very familiar to other things that I've done. And then I continue walking, and then there's this sea of lights and these groups of photographers around this girl. And a PA comes up to me, and he's like, hey, I understand that this is your first scene. Here's a Viagra. If you want to take it, take it. If you don't, it's in your hand. It's yours. If you've never taken anything like this before, I would bite it in half. We need you in 30, 45 minutes. And I was just like, oh man, and I go to the bathroom, and I'm like looking at myself in the mirror. I'm like, what have you done? Like, how can you get out of this?
So let me ask you a question real quick, if I can. I'm sorry.
Sure.
There's going to be guys listening to this going, what do you mean? How did you get yourself into this? Right? You're because in their minds, they're thinking, oh, this is a beautiful woman, and you're about to get paid to go have a good time. Right? Like, so what was it in that moment? Because again, if you're someone that's approaching this from maybe like a worldview, like I grew up in a Christian worldview where we had various views on this stuff, right? But you didn't, right? You didn't necessarily grow up with any sort of adverse thoughts about, doing this, not necessarily anyways. So what was it, do you think, in that moment to where, a 22-year-old guy watching this is thinking, what are you upset about? But you were. Why was that?
Yeah, I mean, I think just the reality of like looking over at this girl and seeing not one, not two, but three cameras filming her. It's like this sea of lights. It's super intimidating. And, I kind of went into it, like this is 2006, so like I thought like, maybe like a handheld like camcorder, and I was going to walk in a bedroom and I would hand it over after the fact. But all of a sudden, this is going to be very different than I thought it was going to be. And then I began to think about, well, what if someone sees this?
Yeah.
And then I kind of get to it. I get in this place where it's almost like a kid at a sleepover that needs to call their dad or mom to come pick them up. And it's like, if I want to leave, I'm not even sure where I am. Like, how am I going to get out of here?
Yeah.
And I'm like, what? I'm going to call the agent and say, hey man, I changed my mind. Can you take me home? I was like, oh, and so shame in that aspect, it was like, oh, like pride and shame. It's like, I can't do that. And then I think there's so many times that we believe we've gone so far that we need to keep going, and that's Satan talking. There's so many times where it's like, okay, we did this thing one time, so we might as well do it another time. Or, well, I've already gone this far, so I might as well continue going. And it just wasn't true. Like there was nothing stopping me from walking out that door but me. And like, sure, there was a level of manipulation, but I could have left, but I didn't. So I popped the entire Viagra, chugged a water, and walked into this sea of lights. Never made eye contact with a girl. So it's like you're like the guy's using erectile dysfunction medication, the girl's using like numbing cream. There's 3 cameras. There's a guy like, often a pimp or a boyfriend or something like in the corner watching, eating Doritos. There's a sea light like underneath you. There's a boom like right by your head. And then you're not having sex. Like you're doing something that looks like sex, but it's not for you, or it's not for engagement. It's for the camera. So you're having sex in a way that is for the camera, so you're uncomfortable and you're not doing what you want to do or doing what feels good. You're doing what you're told to do. And it was just this like really like slimy, like gross feeling interaction. And even like when the girl is like, it looks if the girl is looking at you, like back then, like these are back in the day where they had these like gigantic cameras. There's literally a camera guy with the camera draped over my shoulder, and the girl's looking at the camera lens, and my head's like, way off. I'm trying to get out of the way, because the reality is, by no means is it, am I comfortable? Are we engaging in this intimacy? Are we connected? No, we're completely disconnected. And the only thing that matters is her looking in the lens of that camera, making the person watching that believe as if this is not this aspect of fantasy or fiction. They want it to seem as if it's real. And then after the fact, I felt like, oh my gosh, like I'll never do that again. Like I couldn't wash off the way that I felt. I got like $500. I'm just like, this just wasn't worth it. And I was like, I'll never do this again. No chance. I'll never do this again. I made $500 working at that restaurant. Like there's no chance I'll ever do this again. And a few weeks go by, and that clip that that scene that I did, for the most part, it went viral. And then all of a sudden, fraternity brothers, friends from home, people started seeing it. And if anyone that's from a small town, it only takes one person to know one thing about your life for everyone to know everything about your life. And word gets back to my mom, and she, growing up in the South, it's like how much of your name is used is contingent of how much trouble you're in. So I knew when my mom used, Joshua Broome, I knew that I had done something wrong, and she knew something. And she's like, did you do a porno? And I was like, I did. And she cried, and I hurt the only person that never hurt me. And I could have responded by saying, I'll never do that again. I messed up. I'm sorry. Instead, I let the feeling of shame override my commitment to being her son. And that's when I started pushing her away, even though she continued pursuing me. And then about a week later, when I thought like, okay, the coast is clear. Like, what am I going to do? Now, like when's my next job gonna come? And I was actually super excited, because regarding acting, I just got it. I just got invited to be part of like the improv. And like being at the improv, it's a place where you sharpen your improvisation skills, and just like really great for like off the cuff. It's like when you go on auditions, it's like you might have this monologue that you prepared a million times, but all of a sudden if they throw a character at you that you haven't read for before, or a personality that you're not familiar with, if you haven't had some reps doing stuff like that, you're not going to be as successful. So this really prepared you for a lot of things. But anyway, I got a call from my agent. It was like, hey, could you come down? And normally if I came down to meet in person, that was a good thing. I was like, okay, like here's an opportunity that we should evaluate. Either it's like you book this like fashion week and you're going to be going to like Paris or London or whatever for like X amount of time, or here's this project that you might be working on. Instead, she's like, hey, I want to be just upfront and honest with you. Your name is attached to pornographic content. And, mind you, this is 2006. So very different world back then. So I want you to know that I think a lot of you, and I think you have a lot of potential, but our organization cannot be tied to your name, because your name is now tied to pornographic content. So unfortunately, we can't represent you anymore. So I wish you the best. Again, and we think the world of you.
Wow.
And all
So
of a sudden,
had it ever occurred to you that doing that would have cost you your agent?
I mean, I think there was a level of,
or did you just think this was really kind of be a one-off thing that maybe got seen in certain circles, but you just didn't anticipate it was going to go so viral? Obviously, that your hometown was going to know about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a lot of factors. It's like, because I didn't watch a ton of porn,
Yeah.
I wasn't aware that, okay, like I'm doing a scene for what was then the most popular, most visited website. And like they were doing some stuff digitally that I wasn't aware of. Like I was aware of like porn that was on, like of course like on the internet, but for the most part I thought like, okay, DVD and like magazines where like porn existed or whatever. I guess I was just naive, and I guess I didn't want to believe that if I did that it would cost me something, and I certainly didn't count the cost. So I think there was a level of me being naive. But yeah, so I didn't, like, I certainly didn't think, well, if I do this, this for sure is going to blow up everything that I've been working towards for the last 9 years. But it certainly did.
So what happens next?
Yeah, so I mean, I thought like, okay, like in the acting space, I understand like that, like, I've been essentially blackballed from that industry, but I was like, modeling, it's like, I could probably still continue modeling. And that was kind of like always like my, my second choice anyway. And I started calling around, and all of a sudden nobody was calling me back. Nobody was emailing me back. And I was like, man. And then right on time, the porn agent calls me. He's like, hey, everything went great. The director, the producer, like really liked working with you, and I would actually like to sign you to a long-term contract and represent you as your agent. And I thought, well, and I mean, I think there's so many times where, again, it's like, if you believe a lie to be true, like if you believe a lie to be true in a way, that lie becomes truth to you. And I believe that, well, this is the only thing I could do. This is my only option. I was in a crossroads. I wasn't in a one-way street. Again, I was 22. Sure, I would have had to like moved and shifted some things, and maybe I couldn't continue doing what I was going to do. But I mean, I was a sharp dude. It's like I could have done something else. But I allowed my thought processes to make me believe, okay, well, this is my only option. And if I'm going to do it, just who I am, I can't, half tell anything. It's like, I don't know what it's like to just dabble in something. Like if I'm going to do it, I'm going to become the best. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to say yes to signing this contract. But I've got some pretty significant goals. I want to make, $1 million by this time, and I want to win these awards And the agent was like, certainly. He's like, easy, you'll do that. And the scary thing was I did. I did everything I set out to do. But what I thought was, when I eclipsed the metrics in which I set, I thought on the other side of those metrics was peace and joy and fulfillment. And after 6 years and 1,000 movies and millions of dollars made and tons of awards won, on the other side of that was an amplified anxiety, a deepened depression. And in 2012, I won Performer of the Year, which is like the biggest award a guy can win in that industry. And when I won it, and it didn't make me feel like I thought it would, crushed me. And not too long after that, about 6 months after that, I was still working, and I did a film in Atlanta, and I'd flown back to LAX, and I decided on the plane that I was going to take my life.
Let me ask you something real quick, because I want to. You had brought something. You brought two things up as you were describing this, because I want to talk about this, but I feel like there's two other things in there. One, you had mentioned the paperwork, the contract that they made you sign. Because again, they got you into a situation here where, again, you get paid your $500 and you're thinking, okay, that's a one-off thing, never going to do it again. And then they come back and he signs you. And what did you mean by that? What did you mean to say that, man, you wish you would have read it?
Well, on the contract you sign, there's certain amount of paperwork you're filling out as an independent contractor, but in addition to that, what you would sign is that you're waiving all rights from them selling the content to as many third parties for an unlimited amount of time. So there's no amount of people that can own different aspects of that content, both the pictures, the sound, and the video. So they can partition that into any way they want, and they can sell it to as many people as they want. So what that looked like is that I did one film, and yet I found my face on sex toys. I saw my picture on dating websites. I saw dating profiles and all this stuff. And all of a sudden, what I didn't realize is that one piece of content was broken into hundreds of pieces of different content owned by different people who were all profit. Yeah.
Well, and also I think people look at it. It's easy for people in 2023 to look at this and say, well, how did you not know that putting your stuff out on the internet was going to go? This is 2006, man, different world. It wasn't, I don't think a lot of us, we still had no grasp of putting something in the internet was forever.
Yeah.
And essentially for everyone. And, and especially in a commercial thing where now you've got one of the most powerful industries, if not the most powerful industry on the internet, pushing your stuff out everywhere to make as much as they possibly can on it.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, just in retrospect, thinking about this, so I've been out of that industry for 11 years, and there's 33 people, well now 34 people that have either committed suicide or died of overdose that I was personal friends with. That these are people that I know their real names. I knew where they were from. I shared meals with them. Real people that I had personal interactions with that are dead. And 100% of these people, when they died, their obituary said their stage name and how many films they did, and that's who they were. And then the porn industry would make a compilation film in honor of them, and they would monetize the very thing in which led to their demise. Because all except a few of those people, what they end up doing is, this is the trajectory that specifically girls go on. You come in the industry, you have a no list. There's a list of things that you don't want to do. And after you have, a certain longevity in your career, after you've done X amount of movies for, X amount of time, your popularity often starts to dissipate because people are looking for new, and they've seen you do all these things. And the director, I'm sorry, the agent goes to different studios and say, "Hey, how much will you pay for them to do the thing they haven't done?" And they take essentially an auction, and they say, "Okay, $50,000 to do this act they haven't done." And then the agent comes back to the talent and says, "Hey, I know that you haven't been getting a lot of work lately, but guess what? This studio out of nowhere just called me, and they said they would give you $50,000 to do this thing that you said you didn't want to do. And I know you said you didn't want to do it, but if you do this thing, then your name will be relevant again, and people will start hiring you, and you'll have extra funds to do whatever you want to do with." And then they say yes to do it. Then all of a sudden, the thing that they do that they didn't want to do, it just becomes part of who they are. Because in that, when you're living that way, and I speak from personal experience, it's not that you felt ashamed because you sold yourself for sex. You were your shame because you were, a sex worker, in that the only value in which you have is to sell yourself for sex. And your yes starts to get minimized because you're in an environment where directors and different people are telling you all the time, who's going to marry you, who's going to hire you, what are you going to put on your resume, what else are you going to do? You might as well keep doing it and do more and go further, because who's going to take you seriously?
Wow.
So your no loses its validity, because if you say no to something, then you're saying no to the only thing you can say yes to. And if you do say no, that thing in which you can only say yes to is maybe going to be taken away from you. Maybe that director is going to stop hiring you. Maybe that production company is going to stop hiring you if you don't do the thing they asked, and they know that.
So they get you in initially. They kind of do that whining, dining, make you feel special thing. Then once you have it, it's almost like they got you, because now they can manipulate you with the idea that nobody else is going to take you seriously. You're not going to be able to work in other fields. Where do you go after this?
Yeah.
And then it's the security blanket again with, well, here's the no list. Here's the things you don't ever have to do. This is up to you. But it sounds like what they do is they get you in, and once they got you, they run you through that no list until they've used everything that you've got. And then the final thing that they do is profit off of your death.
Yeah.
Jeez.
That's and that's the story for 33 people who were my friends that should be alive today. That they saw this tunnel of darkness ahead of them, and they didn't see a life worth living, and they saw a world that viewed them, as this person on this internet that did these things, and they're carrying this scarlet letter in which will always be the case. So what's the point? If I can't even pursue something else, I can never outshine this persona in which I was for moments of my life. This now outshadows every aspect of my identity. I either, tell myself a lie and live a lie in which I say, I love the industry. I love what I do. I'm made for this. I've always wanted to do this. I love my job. What else, what else are you going to say? Because even if you're a walking hypocrite, you have to say that, because to say, well, I hate myself, I hate my job, but this is just what I have to do. How long are you going to last with that mentality?
How often was like copious amounts of drug use? Was that common with respect to shooting and stuff like that, with people trying to get over, like, kind of the idea of what they were doing and what it meant for them?
So what was sad was that the people who were most successful in the industry, they took care of themselves. And I mean, for me, it's like I abused, steroids, HGH, like, etc. And I certainly like drank and partied and stuff like that. But for the most part, if you would show up to set inebriated anyway, you would get sent home. But it's the after the fact. So like many times, people were not using drugs to do the work. They were using drugs to cope with what they did, and then they became addicted. And then later on in their career, yes, they would be the ones showing up to set high or drunk, or you know,
Let me,
or going through withdrawals and having to do the scene so that they can go get the hit, so that they don't feel bad about the thing that they just did.
there was another thing you mentioned early on when you were talking about that first time that you went in there to do this, and you said, it's not this idea where it's this intimate thing between you and a beautiful woman or something. It's not. There's a bunch of people around. There's cameras all over the place. It feels completely disconnected, and then you mentioned that you look over and there's her boyfriend or there's her pimp. Now, how often would you say? Because again, we first met at a anti-human trafficking event, and you were kind of sharing your story about like what this industry is really like. And obviously, it's not like guys are walking in with pimp on their business card. But was it prevalent that there would be women there that in one way or another, felt coerced or maybe just as if there were just no other options. They just been.
So it was an absolute anomaly if that wasn't the case. And you're in retrospect, like thinking back, there were a lot of sites that were labeled as barely legal, and teen porn was the most popular niche. And you're there was one company that would hire girls, and everyone on set would be celebrating because it was their birthday. It would be their 18th birthday. And just in retrospect, it didn't even like occur to me. They're 18 today, yet they're on set, and they lived in Ohio or somewhere else. They don't live in LA.
Yeah.
So how does this person who turned 18 today, go through the processes of testing and, being flown to LA and knowing where to be? Like, what led up to them getting there? And almost always it was someone who was operating as a pimp. And the way that looked like back then, so this is when Craigslist wasn't as creepy of a place, but on Craigslist, it would be like I would say, when I was in the industry, like 2006, 2007, especially, this was probably 75% of the girls who were in the industry. They applied to a photo shoot that was on Craigslist. They would show up, and the photographer would take photos of them, and then the photographer would ask them to remove one article of clothing, or pose in a provocative way. And then the moment that the girl would say, I don't feel comfortable with that, or I want to stop, or I don't want to take that off, or I don't want to do that act or simulate that thing, they would say, well, you signed a release when you got here, and I'm going to use this content regardless of what you say. So just know that you're ruined. Like, everyone's going to see this. And if you don't finish doing what I'm asking you to do, you're not even going to get paid.
Jeez.
So not only can I promise you that these pictures are going to be everywhere, you're not even going to get compensated for what you did if you don't finish doing what I'm asking you to do. And almost all of the time, the girls would say, okay. And they would continue doing what they had asked them to do. And then you ask these girls, well, how did you get into the industry? It's like, well, I did this photo shoot that my boyfriend set up, or I went to this photo shoot, and then, I did this stuff, and I met this guy, and I did this thing, and it was time after time after time. It was someone that came from either a broken home, or they'd experienced abuse, or they were abused, and they led to them believing that, well, this is just who I am, so this is what I have to do. And you look at the correlation of, like, why would someone stay in an abusive relationship? And I mean, as crazy as the 33 number is that I shared about suicide and overdose, I think the number is around 250 people in the last 30 years that have died of murder, suicide, overdose. And it points to people putting themselves in situations in which they don't value their worth, and they're certainly not valued by the people they are with. And they end up in harm's way. Why? Because the thing that they crave most is consistency. And even if the person or environment is toxic to them, they're so sure that they're going to be rejected by any and everyone else. The consistent thing in their life that they can cling to, that's the only thing they have. So they're drawn to the chaos, so they stay there because there's
So,
comfort in the chaos, because that's the one thing they can depend on.
so So you had a lot of the men and the women involved in this, broken families. You had a lot of women that find themselves where they went to something that they thought maybe they didn't think it was, maybe they thought it was innocent, maybe they didn't think it was totally innocent, but they still thought they were in control of their situation, only to find out that they were essentially going to be, if not, I mean, blackmail is a form of coercion. And if somebody is inviting you to a photo shoot and you say, I'm not comfortable past this, and they say, okay, well, you signed a waiver, I'm going to send this everywhere, or you can continue to do this. It's not hard to see how a young woman from, a broken home doesn't have somebody that is looking out for her or there to protect her, doesn't have a father that's looking out for her to protect her. We have this idea, and this was something that, our mutual friend Victor Marx talked about, is like, we have this idea after watching things like Sound of Freedom, that it's the idea of a kid getting kidnapped. And instead we fail to realize that sometimes it really can be as simple as a 16 or 17-year-old thinking that she's going to go do a photo shoot. She's going to be a famous model one day. She's going to be an actress one day. And then all of a sudden it goes a little bit farther and a little bit farther. And the next thing you know, it's not because she desperately always wanted to be in this industry, porn industry. It's because she thinks she's damaged goods. And this is it. And this is all she's good for anymore. Let me ask you this. So you're going through this. You've been, again, you yourself felt captured into it at some point. Like this is the only thing left that you could do. And if this is the only thing left you're going to do, well, then you're going to do it. You're going to do it well. And so you experienced what anybody would call like the success, kind of the height of the success within this industry that you're now in. And so it wasn't as if, again, you decided that if this is my fate, well, then I'm going to seize it.
Yeah.
In the hopes that maybe by being the best at what I'm doing, that's going to provide some validation. That's going to provide some peace or some sense of meaning or purpose.
Yeah.
And then you find yourself flying back, having achieved, relative success in this, and you're getting ready to kill yourself.
Yeah.
So what happened? Why did you land in LAX and not go through with it? What stopped you?
Yeah. So I got back to my place and I wrote down on a piece of paper reasons I want to die. And I actually still have this. I wrote, "You will never be a father," because I wanted to become the thing I never had. "You'll never be a husband," because I wanted to become to someone what I never saw my mom experience. And to be clear, when I say become a father, I don't mean get a girl pregnant. I mean be someone's father. There's a huge difference. And then same thing for being a husband. I wanted to be a husband to someone. And then lastly, I said, I wrote, "I'll never contribute to the world in a way that leads to positive change." I thought I disqualified myself from those things. If I was disqualified from the things I wanted most, then what's the point? And I had a check in my pocket, and I look at that check, and on the memo of the check, it was clear that I'd been compensated for sex. And normally, my MO was that I would go to a Dropbox, mobile deposit, do anything to, not have a human interaction when I'm making that transaction. But on this day, that's exactly what I wanted. What I wanted I need someone to agree with me. I wanted someone to justify the thing, and I was setting out to do. And I walked into this bank and I slid the check across the counter, and I waited for the antagonistic remark. I waited for the shaking of the head, the sound of disgust. And she didn't really react. She, went about her business, and then she handed me a receipt. And as I took the receipt and I started to walk away, she said, "One moment, Joshua. Excuse me, Joshua. Can I help you? Joshua, are you okay?" And to be clear, she wasn't in a, this wasn't a customer service moment. This was seeing a young man that was, you know, pale, sweating, terrified, visibly not okay. And she saw me in that moment, and she simply said, "Joshua, are you okay?" And the gravity of that was that I had isolated myself and disconnected myself from anyone and everyone that actually knew me, to the point that in that industry, going by a stage name, I haven't even heard my real name in over a year, because I allowed, the people in the gym and my barber and the people at the studio, of course, to call me by this stage name. But anyone that loved me enough to tell me the truth, to say, "Joshua, dude, what are you doing with your life? What are you doing, man? You're better than this." Because the way that works, like, if you said, "Hey, man, I heard you speaking to your wife in a way that doesn't line up with the man I know you are. Are you feeling all right? Like, what's going on?" I could say, "Nick, thank you so much for telling me, man. I needed to be called out on that. I'm tired and frustrated, and I should not have spoke to my wife like that. I need to apologize to her. And man, I would love to grab a cup of coffee with you and just download some stuff going on in my life with you. Thank you for caring enough to say that to me. That probably wasn't easy to say. Thank you." That's one way I could respond. But another way would be, "Dude, don't tell me how to live my life."
Mhm.
And I push anyone that loves me enough to tell me the truth away. And that's what I had done. So anyone that wasn't patting me on my back on my way to my detriment, I disconnected myself from them, so I didn't have to face the reality of, what, I have ruined my life. And if because I didn't see myself possible, I didn't see change possible. So I thought, okay. And then I even believed the lie that, well, I'm doing my mom a favor of disconnecting myself from her, because I've even disqualified myself from being a son. Like, what do I have to offer her? Like, she's saying that she loves me and she wants to talk to me and she wants me to come home for Christmas, but she's saying that because she has to. She doesn't truly mean that. So I'm going to do her a favor and relieve the burden from her and remove myself from her. And so at this point, my mom had been calling and texting me for weeks, and I just don't respond. So when that teller said that, it kind of woke me up, and I felt the weight of me robbing that knowledge from my mom. Am I okay? And I run home and I call my mom, and she chews me out. But, um, after she chews me out, she's like, "Man, I love you so much. I'm so glad you're okay, and, know that, uh, you'll never not have a place here, and you'll always be my son, and I love you so much, and I just wish that you would please come home." And that's all I needed to hear. When I heard everything I didn't think I was going to hear, I picked up the phone and I called everyone that I needed to call. And I was like, I quit. Subleased my place, and I was out of there, and never did porn again. But what I brought with me was the, the very real mental and emotional damage that comes from living like that for so long. And even though I put myself in a different space, I still had a lot of trauma to deal with. And I started working at a gym, but same mentality. I'm like, well, I ended up getting this really great mentor. His name's Jason Davidson. He poured into me. He was the strength conditioning coach for the Carolina Hurricanes, and currently he leads the Thor program at Fort Bragg.
Mm.
Just incredible man that that encouraged me and gave me a kick in the butt at the same time. But I had a lot of doors open up because of my commitment to excellence and him vouching for me. And had a lot of success in the health and fitness space, in the strength conditioning space. And while I was doing all that, thought, well, if I get enough, accreditations tied to my name, if I do enough good things, if I put enough good dirt on my bad dirt, I won't feel dirty.
Mm.
And I didn't think I was truly possible of change, but maybe I could manage people's perception of me and I could do enough good things so I could minimize the bad things in which I'd done. So maybe even though no one's probably going to respect me, they could at least not have this disdain for me because of these things that I've done. And I lived that way for about 2 years. And so about 2 years into living that way, this girl walks in this gym and the prettiest thing I ever seen in my life. And I go and I ask her out on a date and she shuts me down,
Mm.
which made me fall in love. And I continued pursuing her and asking her on dates and lunches, and she just wasn't having it. And she was like, "Okay, we can go for a run." And I was like, I'm more about like pushing sleds and doing sprints, but I guess I'll go on a run. And we met to go on this run. And when we got there, I just had this overwhelming feeling of like, man, I can't lie to this girl.
Yeah.
I can't hurt this girl. And I'm going to then I made it about me. I was like, I'm going to do her a favor. I'm going to tell her about myself. And then, she'll want nothing to do with me. And when she
Wait, is
got
this like
there,
the
I was like,
first
hey,
date?
yeah, this is like this probably
Wow.
wouldn't even be considered a date. This is
Wow.
probably and what I was trying to do is I was trying to, damage control. I was like, hey, like if I go on a date with her and like then like if I don't disclose this information to her, like she's so precious and she was like, the best athlete at this gym. She was a gymnast, like college cheerleader, like really accomplished, like CrossFitter. So it's like everyone at the gym loves her. So it's like if I hurt this girl, like I might get fired.
Mhm.
Everyone, like all of like these people are gonna hate me. So I'm like worst case scenarios in my head. But again, making it about me. So I'm like, I need to tell her this so it doesn't like really impact me. So when she gets there, I'm like, hey, I got something to tell you. And I feel like I like blacked out. I'm like, hey, here's every bad thing that I can, grasp in the last, my lifetime. And at the end of this, just like word vomit of me saying things I'd never said to anyone freely, because I mean, like I had got found out by people and had to say, yeah, you're right. Those things are on the internet. That is me. But I was never forthcoming with this information.
Yeah.
And this was the first time I had done that. So I'm like, hey, these things are true about me. This is who I am. And she very quickly said, well, are you doing these things now? And I was like, no, it's been a little over 2 years. So this is Easter 9 years ago. So I left in the industry. So this is Easter 2015. And I had left the industry in January of 2013. And she was like, okay. And then she, and we continue walking and it's just like, is she gonna slug me? Or
Yeah.
should I just leave? Should I just let her be? Like, and then she just kind of like plants her feet and she plants her feet and looks at me very seriously and just like everything about her demeanor changes. And she said, I want you to know that a person is not defined by the worst thing they've ever done. And a person is not defined by the greatest thing they'll ever do. There's a God that exists outside of time, space, and matter, and he created everything, including me and you. He has the final say. He says who you are. So while those feelings might be true, and you may have done those things, that's not who you are. Do you know who God is? And I was like, maybe.
Wow.
Because I mean,
What did you feel?
my
Did you feel like just relieved in that moment? Did you feel
oh
like,
yeah, dude. Like it's like yeah, like yes, 1,000%. But also like very conflicted because like what she said was like, hold on, because what I believed to be 1,000% true was that who I was at my core was this unwanted child, which made me invaluable, and I carried the scarlet letter in which I done bad things. So I'm not only a bad person, but I'm a bad person who has their highlight reel of all the things that I would never want you to know on the internet, and anyone on earth can find them with one click of a button. This is who I am. And she was like, no, 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 you're not God. So you don't get to define who you are. The things that happened to you and the things you did, sure, that makes you see yourself in a certain way. Yes, that thing, those feelings associated with those are real, but that in no way, shape, or form constitutes who you are, because you're not God.
Mm.
And I was just like, I'm floored by that, because she confronted the thing in which, I created my identity by. And, and I like kind of, I tried to kind of be like, okay, well, maybe, I know God, like, I don't know. And it's like, well, I did go to church like as a kid. My grandfather and grandmother loved Jesus. So maybe, I'm a Christian by association. I believe there's, a creator that created everything. Sure. Like I would even say, hey, the cosmological argument, like that makes sense. Like a timeless, spaceless, intelligent designer created all these things simultaneously. Like, yeah, like that makes sense. But then what she was talking about was different, because
Yeah.
she was saying, hey, well, myself, I've been following Jesus since I was in the 7th grade. My whole family is followers of Jesus, and I'm not perfect by any means. But I want you to know that the foundation that I make decisions from and live my life through is my relationship with Jesus. So tell me about yourself. What kind of food do you like? What are your hopes and dreams? I was like, who are you? Like, are you an alien? Like, what, what, what's going on?
Wow.
And then we just walk and talk for hours. And then we text like high school idiots for the rest of the week. And then when Sunday comes around, she invites me to church. And I go to church and I hear this sermon based on 2 Samuel chapter 9 about this dynamic between David and Mephibosheth. And David was this king that had this covenantal promise with Jonathan, and Jonathan had a son
Yeah.
named Mephibosheth, and he had promised kindness to his son forever. And even though his grandfather Saul and his father Jonathan had died in battle, David, now being king, he could have seen Mephibosheth as an adversary, because historically, if anyone existing outside of the kingdom from a different family that had any kind of lineage pointing to the kingship, they were hunted down and killed. So Mephibosheth was in this place called Lodabar, meaning place of no pasture. So he was in this desert wasteland in Palestine, just waiting on doomsday. And then David sends a guard to go find him. And now he's standing in front of him and says, hey, I'm not going to kill you. Actually, I'm going to restore your grandfather's land. I'm going to invite you to be part of this kingdom, and you're going to sit at my table forever.
Wow.
And his response was not, wow, thank you. His response, I resonated with so much. He was like, don't you know who I am? He's like, he referred to himself as a dead dog. So 2 Samuel chapter 9, verse 8, he refers to himself as a dead dog. He was like, well, that's great and all, but don't you know who I am? Don't you know who my daddy is? Don't you know what my grandfather did? Don't you know I'm lame in both feet? Don't you know who I am? And I'm sitting there hearing the story of Jesus. I'm at this point where like the historicity of the Bible, undeniable. The historicity of Jesus being a real person that really was born of a virgin, lived a perfect life, died on the cross, rose again. I like, okay, I'm with you. Romans 10:9. If you believe in your heart that Jesus is Lord, and believe that he was, raised on the third day, if you confess that with your mouth, like you will be saved. Like I'm hearing all this stuff, and it's like, okay, that's great for whoever that's for, but I'm disqualified from that because you don't know my story.
Yeah.
And then he read Hebrews 12:2, and it talks about it was with joy set before him that Jesus endured the cross, and something invaded my mind and my heart when I realized that yes, Jesus was perfect in every way. He was fully God and fully man, so he's fully perfect in every way. So yes, he was obedient to his Father, but also it was love in his heart that sent him to the cross, because he knew who he was dying for, and he was dying for me and for you. And just the thought that entered my mind and entered my heart was that not only has my desire for a good father come to be this, this realization point that he had always been with me. And I had pictures in my mind of times where I should be dead. There's people that I have interacted with that have died from HIV. There's been people, shot and killed in proximity to me. There's been times where I woke up in a ditch. There's been times throughout my life that I should be dead. And yet I saw this loving father protecting me in spite of myself. Romans 5:8. While we were at our worst, Christ died for us. And I realized the father that I always wanted, I actually had. And he was waiting for me. And he loved me. And that wrecked me in the best of ways. And I surrendered my life to Jesus. And that girl that I went on that walk with, her name is Hope. And she's been my wife for 8 years. And we have 4 boys. And Ephesians 3:20 is real. I have not what I hoped I would ever have. I wouldn't have had the guts to dream to have the life that I have today.
So as you look back on that note you wrote out,
Yeah,
as justification for ending your life, you're now a father, you're now a husband, and you're now doing something that is truly beneficial.
yeah. Yeah, and my focus is on a multitude of things. It's, really men, ministry, and marriage. And that's the 3 buckets in which I pour my life out to. It's, how do you, how did I become, because, again, God redeems everything, including, my personality and my commitment to things. So 3 days after I give my life to Jesus, I find myself in this church. And I'm like, hey, how do I learn to read the Bible?
Yeah.
How do I learn to pour my life out for the one who died for me? How do I do that? Like, where do I sign up? What do I do? And there was a man that loved me enough to not do the bare minimum, but he committed his time and effort to me, and he unlocked something in me that I didn't know that I had. I think we all need someone to help us optimize our lives, to help us reach the capacity in which we didn't see ourselves to have, because we need, that Proverbs 27:6. We need that, the wounds of a friend. We need loving correction. We need people that love us enough to tell us the truth. We need people that have our back. And we started meeting weekly, and he taught me how to read the Bible, taught me how to study the Bible. And then he started having these meetings with me, and he not only was like, he wasn't just giving me a checklist of, hey, are you doing these things? And are you not doing these things? Where are the things that you don't want to think? Where are those thoughts taking you? And what's the behavior attached to those? And I really started getting to the root of these things. The pornography epidemic that we have in this world, it stems from an identity crisis, and pornography is, something that you use to put a Band-Aid on a wound from something else. It was a wound or a lack or a compromise in your life. That
Let me ask you this, because this is something where, there was at various times when you were describing how you felt about being in this industry, there was a lot of discussion about like the shame associated with it.
Yeah.
And shame has the ability to, I always tell people, when people are confronted with shame, there's usually 2 responses to it. There's repentance and there's doubling down.
Yeah.
And the repentance usually only comes when someone feels like there's a way out. And the doubling down comes when they don't feel like there is. When like, this is it. This is the only option. If this is all I got, well, then that's it. And I have seen this drive right now. And it's not just within pornography. It's within any list of things that I think when you use the term identity crisis, that's absolutely appropriate. That's the thing that explains, I think, so much of what's going on, is because when we try to identify ourselves outside of who God made us to be, it's never going to be sufficient. And so we're always going to be throwing things into a chasm that's never going to be filled up, because it's not what it's for. So here's my question. Yeah. What do you say to the people that say, no, Josh, the problem was not what you were doing or the industry or all the other things you mentioned. The problem was the shame. So we just need to
Right.
remove the shame.
Yeah.
What is your response to that?
Yeah. I mean, I think the shame, it is born out of a place that you can't run from.
Mm.
I think that there's this overarching uh, truth that we were never made to live that way. And when you do something that is outside of God's design, the feeling that you feel is shame, and and the byproduct of shame is isolation, and that's why there's this cyclical effect tied to it. But it's so interesting. So I spoke at a philanthropy event in West Palm Beach a few months ago or a few weeks ago, and after the talk that I gave, at the end of it, someone came up to me and said, "Well, um, people are just going to watch porn." So wouldn't a more realistic solution, instead of so my life's goal is to eradicate the porn industry in which we know it to be today.
Mhm.
I'm not naive to think that sexual immorality is going anywhere. That's always going to exist, but to eradicate the existence of pornography in how we know it today, it's like, man, that's just not realistic. That's not realistic. Wouldn't a better course be to advocate for ethical pornography? And I was like, man, if you plant the same seed in the same ground, you're going to get the same fruit every time. And what you're doing is you're just going back. We did a an 8-part docu-series podcast around my story and then the growth of the porn industry. And it's like, you look at how it went from, print to, magazines to silent films to what we know it to be today. It's like that's the trajectory it takes. No matter where you start, if you plant an evil thing, an evil fruit is going to grow from it. No matter how you slice it. So, to the thing of shame, you can't remove shame from something that's always going to cause shame. It's impossible. So that there is no way around a bad thing,
I feel like
being a
it's
catalyst for pain, destruction, and hurt.
yeah. I feel like it's it's like removing pain from something that physically hurts you, right? There's actually a condition where people don't feel pain with respect to the nerves not working properly or the brain not processing it properly. And it doesn't mean that, oh, great, you just don't feel pain. No, it's actually incredibly debilitating and dangerous, because the pain receptors are absolutely important to let you know that what you're doing is harmful. And when people can't feel that pain, or they can't feel the heat or whatever it is, what ends up happening
Yeah.
is they're not better off for it. They die,
Yeah.
or they lose a limb, or they get a horrible infection or whatever it is. But it gets worse, because the problem is not the shame. The problem is that which legitimately causes the shame.
Yeah, you look at, the mental health crisis that exists in, in America, and it's tied to chronic loneliness. And why does loneliness exist in the way it does? Well, if you're disconnected and discontent from the way in which you're living your life, well, that's only going to compound over time. And when you're disconnected from and you're suppressing reality, every time, that's going to look like it, creating depression, anxiety, feelings of self doubt, wondering what's your purpose in life, and so on. Um, and it's because we've bought into this fact that we can, self govern ourselves. We can create this autonomous life where I know what's best for me. And that's really back to the garden. It's like, did God really say?
Mm-hmm.
Did God really want you not to eat from the tree? He's withholding something from you, and the reality is He's actually protecting you from yourself in the world. And that's why the word of God is so important. I say it's a gate and a weapon. It protects us from destruction, and it equips us for reality.
Well, John, I appreciate this, and obviously we've spoken before, and I've seen you speak before, and I've always found it impactful. But I think one of the things that I really appreciate about the conversation that we've had here is that, this is something that I think. Well, first of all, I think it gets downplayed sometimes how much young women struggle with pornography as well.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I mean, just like the data.
Yeah.
Just like the data says. So 18 to 24 years old, 94% of guys see porn once a month. 67% of women, 18 to 24, see porn once a month.
It's
talking.
Well, yeah. and like you said, I think one thing that I would want, both, I mean, young women, but I also obviously I'm a man, so I can't understand it exclusive. I can't understand it from a female perspective the same way a woman could. But I guess for the guys out there that watch this, and we do talk a lot about what does it mean to be a man, like a real man? What does it mean to be a husband? Yeah. What does it mean to be a father? I guess one of the things that, I've been convicted about is that what guys think they're seeing, and look, God made us to find the female form beautiful and exotic, yeah, and all of that. And he made, and I absolutely believe he made sex to be a beautiful thing between a husband and a wife, something to experience, to not only there for obviously the pleasure of that, but to actually get to take part in the creation of human life as a result of it. Sure. Is just an amazing gift. And I think a lot of times what guys are chasing, especially guys now that feel as if the possibility of them finding a wife or having, being a husband, being a father one day, being able to do this, where they almost see it slipping away at the same time that they're being offered this artificial thing, which is once again degrading sex and intimacy into nothing more than response to stimuli. And I guess what I want them to know, because you've been able to provide them insight into this in a way that just most people can't, or at least not with the same authority,
right,
is that what you think you're watching is actually very, very broken people who may or may not be coerced, may or may not be physically coerced to what they're doing, but at the very least are probably being socially coerced into what they're doing, that are having to deal with, are usually relying on substances and whatnot to cope with the results of what they're doing, that don't want to be there, that probably didn't show up that day because this was their lifelong dream, but showed up because they didn't think they had another way out, or they thought they were getting something different than what they did, and then all of a sudden it was too late. They thought it was too late to turn back. That's when you consume that, if you're asking yourself, why would somebody do it? If you're asking yourself, why would, hey, they're getting paid, they're getting compensated, they look like they're having fun, or whatever else. If you want to know what is behind the supply of everything out there that leads to destruction, death, depression, suicide, you want to know what's behind it? Demand. Demand is behind it. And it's not the demand of the people that engage in the act. A lot of times it's the demand of the people that are consuming it. And so the question that you have to ask yourself, if you want to be the sort of man that is going to be protective, that is going to provide, then when it's that girl that you're watching probably doesn't want to be there. That guy that you're watching, that was not his plan for his life, regardless of how glamorous they might try to make it sound. Now that you are in the position of the husband and the father, what is your advice on that? How do you plan to contend with those questions and that temptation that inevitably, faces both men and women?
Yeah. I apologize in advance for the tangent in which I'm about to go on, but I would just say, so a few things. So number one, like as a man, I get the honor and privilege of speaking to men in a lot of different capacities. And I do chapel for a few NFL teams, and I'll share with them like, hey, is your capacity as a man important to you? Do you want to be as impactful and as effective as you could be? If the answer is yes, the neuroscience and the reality of consuming pornography, it makes you lethargic, it minimizes your ability to have integrity, and it makes you not value people. And that's just true. That's not my perspective coming from someone who has a Christian worldview. This is just the reality in which the neuroscience tells us. It impacts your brain in a way where if you look at a CT scan of someone that does heroin and someone who's consuming pornography multiple times a week, the tracks that goes to your brain, it's similar. It shows up on a CT scan. It's impacting your brain to the synapse and to that extent. And if you see people where relationally, if I'm training myself to extract value from a person and I'm treating that person like a product, you are a fool if you don't think you're going to start doing that in your real life. You're going to have transactional friendships. And I think another thing that this is tied to so deeply, people who consume porn don't have deep friendships. It's impossible for you to be completely open and honest with another man that you respect because you're carrying the weight of shame and you're probably having these shallow interactions and you're not giving them access into your life. And we need people that love us enough that call us out. But if there's not real relational equity there and I'm not giving you access into my life, how can you speak into my life? How can you truly watch my back? How can you help me become the man that I want to be if I'm not even allowing you to know me? So that makes you ineffective as a husband, father, in whatever capacity in which you operate in. That's just true. And then, like you were saying, pornography exists and it allows human trafficking to flourish. Kids are harmed because pornography exists. 94% of pornography contains violence. In a real way, Ted Bundy is an extreme example, but many examples of people watching pornography, developing an appetite for something that they never naturally would have developed an appetite for, and then going and doing the thing in which they saw because the dopamine hit that they used to get from the screen in their hand, it doesn't do it anymore. And all of a sudden they live their lives believing that the thing in which they've seen is reality, and it's not. There's a Nobel Prize piece of research called supernormal stimulus. Dr. Tinbergen, he took a female butterfly and put it into outside, and he made this vibrant, better version of this female butterfly. And what happened is the male butterflies, they tried to mate with this. They started ignoring the females, and then they started fighting among themselves, and then they started to die off because the thing in which they had an appetite for didn't exist. And in the same way, porn is a fictional representation of sex. And now we're seeing at an astronomical rate 18 to 24-year-olds struggling with erectile dysfunction medication. They're needing erectile dysfunction medication. They can't be intimate with their spouse because they developed quote unquote fetishes for things that they've seen on a screen that don't happen in real life. And when their spouse doesn't measure up, they can't feel satisfaction because their satisfaction in their mind, it's so ingrained that it happens with a screen in their hand. There's bonding happening in a real time. And to the person asking themselves, I mean, I know I'm going a lot farther than you asked, but I'll just say this. And I'll just say this, like to the person saying, hey, is masturbation a bad thing? Is masturbation something that I ought not do? I'll just say this. If you are in belief that you are training yourself to be a good spouse, to be a good husband, what you're doing is you are training yourself to incorporate disconnection from a human being, connection with your hand in a screen, and to finish quickly. So what you're doing is you're practicing being a poor lover. You're practicing disconnecting yourself from reality. And the byproduct of that is when you are with your spouse, you're going to find yourself not only still addicted to porn, you're going to be more addicted to porn because the shame that comes from not being able to satisfy your wife is going to weigh on you so heavily, you're going to turn back to the place in which you came from. And that, in just a nutshell, is the reality in which pornography is disrupting homes. You know, it's 50% of marriages that end in divorce in the US. It has something to do with pornography, either it in itself or it leads to a deeper level of infidelity. And then we see this research, man, this is the craziest thing. So 60% of kids who are sexually abused that go to the extent where they go to the hospital and they get examined, these examiners are saying on average, 60% of the time, the perpetrator is between 11 and 15 years old. 100% of the time, this is a sibling. And what happened is they're addicted to porn, and they're so addicted, and their mind has been so corrupted, it makes sense to them. And the most popular niche of pornography right now is incest. They conceptualize, I'm going to do this to my brother or sister because I need to satisfy this craving that I have. And 60% of sexual assaults are happening 11 to 15 years old is the normative age gap. And this is what's happening in America, not in this crazy place. Like, this is happening in your back door.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, is it bad? Yeah. Is it destructive to you? Yes. And if you want to be the man that you are called to be a good husband, to be a good father, to be a protector, a contributor to this world, you cannot do that to the extent in which you could when you're consuming something that is diminishing not only your worth, but the way in which you see people across the board.
No, that wasn't a tangent at all, man. That was awesome. No, because again, I think a big part of this is that a lot of young men are just being tired of being told no, or they're being tired of, well, you can't do that. Why? Because it's bad. And it's like, well, look, here's the scientific reasons it's bad. Here's the moral reasons it's bad. Here's the emotional reasons it's bad. Here's the social reasons it's bad. Here's the physical reasons it's bad. And oh, by the way, do you want to be the sort of man that you can admire? Do you want to be the sort of man that is capable and is honest and has integrity? And do you want to be the sort of man that is going to be the sort of husband he needs to be for his wife? And yes, that also means physically. Well, then don't sabotage it, and certainly don't sabotage it with something that you know is destroying the very people that are producing it.
Yeah, like you're literally putting poison into your mind. Like, why would you willingly corrupt yourself? Like, why would you willingly, diagnose yourself with something that is disruptive and destructive in every aspect of your life?
Yeah. Like
physically, mentally, emotionally. There's in every way that matters, it disconnects you from any level of contentment. I'm preaching on Sunday, like literally on that message. It's called Imitation Intimacy. And when you're disconnected from the only source in which you can actually find intimacy, you're going to try to create it yourself. And pornography is the primary source of that. But there's a ton of other things. But man, when you are not connected to the source in which all life flows, you're going to be confused, and you're going to try to sort it out yourself. And man, you just can't.
Yeah. Well, Josh, thank you very much for sharing. Thank you very much for going back and being able to share your history and the things that you experienced and the things that you made it out of, and the way that God met you along that path and saved you in ways that you didn't even know he was doing it. God bless your wife, Hope, for when you just, gosh, the gal didn't even want to go on a date with you, Josh.
Right.
And then the first time you go running, you do all of that. And she had the courage and the connection and the maturity in her faith to be able to look back at you and see what God had made and see what God was going to continue to do with you. And that's incredible. And look, for all the guys watching, for all the young women watching, look, we know this is becoming a very addictive component. It's something that most people in their life at some point struggle with to some capacity. And I guess I don't want you to watch this and think, it's here. It's one more thing where I'm being told I can't do this, or it's bad or whatnot, or I got to give something up. No, what this is you getting insight into what it actually is versus what it's been advertised as.
Yeah,
and
like what?
And the good.
I was gonna say, like, wouldn't you want to know if you were walking into a trap?
Yeah. We got to look. If you're gonna go to the store and you're gonna check the ingredients to make sure what's actually in that food, you just got the ingredients for something that you might be consuming that's actually killing you. Yeah. And at the very least, what it's doing. What it's doing is it is standing in the way of you actually having, like, the reason why people are seeking this out is because there is intimacy and there is love that they want. And the bottom line is that fundamentally, first and foremost, that's going to come with your relationship with your Creator. It's going to come with your relationship with God. And then if you're blessed to be able to find that spouse, that husband, that wife, and you want that relationship to be all it's supposed to be, spiritually, emotionally, intellectually, and physically, well, then the good news is put down the stuff that's poison in that, pick up the stuff that's actually going to make you effective in all those areas. And Josh, I can't thank you so much for being willing to share. Thank you for all the advice and the insight that you've provided. God bless what you're doing, man. And please give our best to your family and know that we're, again, it's an honor to know you. It's an honor to be able to, at least in some small way, host an ability for you to be able to speak to a new audience. Where can people find you online?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I wrote this book right here. So 7 Lies That'll Ruin Your Life. So this book right here, and what's neat about this book is it's not my story. It's really the what came out of my story. So it's a healing or a recipe book for healing. So talking about 7 big lies that culture tries to propagate as truth, and how you can compound that truth. You can compound those lies with what is actually true. But yeah, so I am Joshua Broome is my social media across the board. Like I was sharing earlier, there's a lot of people that still to this day try to compromise my likeness. So if it's not verified, it's not me. Thankful for that process, even though you can buy it now. But yeah, so I am Joshua Broome across the board. And anyone, any organization that's looking to bring me in to speak or anything like that, my website is joshuabroome.me. Yeah, so Joshua BROOM dot. I'm sorry, Joshua BROOME.me. But yeah.
All right. Well, hey, thanks you once again, and thank you to our audience for watching. Please consider going into the notes here, the show notes here. Look at our community chat. If there's someone that you would like us to interview, or questions that you would like us to ask in the future of someone you would like us to interview, that's a great place to go and share that. Once again, thank you very much for joining us on this episode of Making the Argument, and we'll see you next time.